Did you know that the average global temperature has increased by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit in the past 100 years? This alarming evidence shows the gradual heating of Earth's surface, oceans, and atmosphere. The real question here is, though, what is the root cause of the effects of global warming? In my speech today, I will be informing you all about how developed nations are to blame for global warming. This is a subject we can all relate to because we are living and experiencing the horrific effects of global warming every day. In fact, according to the New York Times in a November 12th, 2021 article by Naja Popovich, rich countries, including the United States, Canada, Japan, and much of Western Europe, account for just 12% of the global population today, but are responsible for 50% of all the planet-warming greenhouse gases released from fossil fuels and industries over the past 170 years. I am here to convince you that the real root cause of global warming is not from the people, but from the money-hungry developed nations in this world. To support this, I will examine how fossil fuel firms in developed nations clearly play a major role in the climate problem. I will also explain how rich people in developed nations play a major role towards global warming as well. And lastly, I will be exposing which developed nations contribute to global warming the most. Fossil fuel firms in developed nations clearly play a major role in the climate problem. According to Jocelyn Timperley in a BBC article written on June 18, 2020, a major report released in 2017 attributed 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions over the previous 2 decades to just 100 fossil fuel producers. The more popular firms, Chevron, Shell, Exxon, and BP, are huge contributors to global warming through fossil fuel extractions. Most of these firms we have all heard of and continue to blindly contribute to daily. Chevron topped the list of 8 investor-owned corporations, followed closely by Exxon, BP, and Shell. Together, these 4 global businesses are behind more than 10% of the world's carbon emissions since 1965. The great tragedy of the climate crisis is that 7.5 billion people must pay the price in the form of a degraded planet, so that a couple of dozen polluting interests can continue to make record profits, including wealthy people. Wealthy people in developed nations play a major role towards global warming as well. Throughout 86 countries, the richest 10% of people consume around 20 times more energy than the poorest 10%. Wealthy people are not necessarily a huge factor in global warming, but their spending habits are. According to Jocelyn Timperley in a BBC article, a big portion of this heightened consumption by richer people is through transport. The study found flights, holidays, and big cars driven long distances. The more financially comfortable a person is, the more choices they have. Wealthy people can choose to consume less and use less waste, but that most of the time is not the case. Wealthy people also run all the developed nations in the world and call the shots about the global climate crisis, disregarding poorer countries as a result. The world's richest countries have released the majority of emissions into the atmosphere and continue to emit many times more than poorer ones. According to Jocelyn Timperley in a BBC article, the US has emitted far more CO2 than any other country. A quarter of all emissions since 1751 has occurred here in the US. In other countries like Europe, China, and India, they were only able to grow their economies by burning fossil fuels, just like the US, and those fossil fuels spewed carbon from their factories, cars, and homes. Yet, even as the wealthy nations drive the world toward ecological disaster, it is clearly the poor countries that will face the gravest consequences and have the most difficulty coping to these horrific changes. In this last few minutes, we have examined how fossil fuel firms in developed nations clearly play a major role in the climate problem, learned how rich people in developed nations play a major role towards global warming, and lastly, figured out which developed nations contribute to global warming the most. I hope you all have a better understanding about how developed nations are to blame for global warming. This is a subject we can all relate to because we are living and experiencing the horrific effects of global warming every day. Everyone can contribute to the end of global warming, but significant changes will not happen until developed nations take responsibility.